Chris Hyde is the director of Voices with Impact, which is a film fund, a film festival. And if you win it, it comes with a distribution deal. So we'll get into all this. Brotherly won a couple of years ago. I've also served on the jury. I've been to the festival. I love everything about this. The community's great. I'm still in touch with a lot of the other filmmakers. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for context?
Thanks so much, Gavin. Yeah, so I mean, my background is that I'm a filmmaker, a poet, and that's very much kind of the way I made my way to where I am now. I've always maintained that I can get pretty fed up of how my own voice and what I'm saying. So short form has always been a thing I've always really focused on. So I was actually a recipient of the Voices with Impact grant a couple of times as a filmmaker, and then loved working with the organization and kind of ended up merging my two kind of passions of mental health and filmmaking and storytelling together in being in this very lovely space where I get to work with amazing people and give them money to make lovely things.
Awesome. And the Film Fund is still 7.5K USD available to absolutely anyone in the world to apply for. That's so incredible and unique. I think the only two caveats are it needs to touch on themes of mental health or mental illness, but I've been really impressed with how broad you allow that spectrum to be. And it needs to be 5 minutes. Can you tell us a little more about the money and the constraints that breed creativity?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's really important, I think, if you have the opportunity to be open with a grant, then and a fund, then it's really important to be, because I think that finding the funds to make good work that says something is very difficult. For our purposes, and the reason that the grant exists is that we use these films to connect with young people, to educate young people about mental health and about mental health stigma, and to try and make it easier for those young people to access care and help. So that's really that's the reason the grant exists. The organization used to kind of run film competitions to be able to be connected with films that were talking about mental health in this way, that were short form and were able to kind of open up conversations around mental health. And that was great for years. But, when you're trying to do something really specific and really quite niche, it's much better to be making work for that purpose. So the grant exists very much so to fund filmmakers to make films that are going to work for our educational programming. And that is why they're 5 minutes, because the 5-minute kind of ballpark is really important for not answering too many questions, not kind of giving us all the answers as well. So it's opening up a conversation that then people want to go talk about. And we find that that's kind of a really solid kind of ballpark length for creating really good conversation where people want to, ask what really happened with that character, and they can really put themselves in the shoes of whether it's a subject in a documentary or a character narrative or whatever it might be. So that's kind of why the 5-minute constraint exists. You kind of can't tie everything up in a neat little bow, which is exactly how mental health is. And then kind of touching upon why globally, why worldwide. There's mental health stories all over the world. And I think that there is a lot to be learned from hearing stories from different places, kind of looking at those from our own perspective, learning about how we can connect and learn different things from seeing things. The films really act as this kind of little window to view into a world that maybe you've never experienced before, or as a little mirror to reflect something that you've experienced and feel seen by seeing that. So for us, it's really important to be able to have stories from all over the world, and for those stories to be short, so we can show a few of them in a session and really kind of spark some good conversation.
We'll get back to more on the Film Fund, tips, tricks, advice, just to cover this incredible ecosystem that you and Carrie, and I'm sure some other collaborators have built. So the film festivals, for example, my experience was we were one of 10 films, all 5 minutes, to screen in San Francisco and Vancouver. And it was really great because that was 50 minutes of programming.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I go to these short programs that are 2 hours. It's too much sometimes of short films. You get to a point and you're like, how many are left? It's tough to get a sense of what you've committed to. 50 minutes is great. Yeah. And what you did was great was then, I'll speak for myself, but I think all filmmakers got to connect with the audience after. So it was kind of like 50 minutes, 10 5-minute short films, and then like an hour of Q&A slash meeting the audience and community, which was so, so great.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I think that I totally agree with you. Shorts packages, when they're longer, are really like can be incredible, but also it's so many worlds you're being thrown into, right? There's so many. And that's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like I have space for about 8 worlds in my brain.
8 worlds per hour, 8 WPH.
I always laugh that with the cohort of 10 filmmakers, I can always remember 9, and there's always one I forget, and it's always a different one every single time. It's just my capacity is there. But the idea for the festival is very much that, like, as filmmakers, we don't always get to like celebrate the work that we make in the way that feels like it honors the absolute adventure mission huge thing that it is to bring something to life and finish it and put it out into the world. The festival is really a celebration of that. Honestly, that's kind of the focus of it, is to celebrate the fact that we funded 10 shorts that year with 10 different teams, and to get those 10 teams together to notice that that's a huge thing that was done. Particularly in short form, it can be overlooked. And I think that anything that we create kind of deserves that moment of being like, this is actually special. Like, it's special that we all did this. Because I think that works in terms of like the mission, and what we're trying to do is a lot of what the festival is trying to do alongside the grant is to share that like these stories come from lived experience, and there are real human beings that made those films. And it's really important to kind of have a moment to celebrate that, but also to have a moment where the filmmakers share that piece of themselves with the public for the first time, and get to have a sense of how that connects with an incredible audience that has come there specifically for film that has something to say about mental health. It's a really kind of like, it's very much a big launch, but there's a softness to the launch, in that sense of we want to be able to have a conversation around those films in the way that it was intended the first time that they kind of are in the world, in that sense. So the way that we structure them is 50 minutes of film, a little bit of a kind of break to decompress that somewhat. And then an open panel with the filmmakers. Part of what I really love about that panel is that I ask the questions, and I have been on that journey with the filmmakers the whole time. So I'm able to ask questions around things where, like, if I hadn't been there from looking at the script and looking at the proposal and being along with that journey, and kind of talked back and forth about all the things that they want to achieve with the film and all that, then, I think it's nice to have someone ask the questions who cares about the projects, in a way to open up the conversations that they really, really want to have. Like if the filmmaker said, I really want to talk about this part of the film, and it ends up being a subtle part of the film, that's something that we can kind of pass out in that moment and have that conversation. And also it's great because I don't have to take any notes, because it's all in my head already. I've been doing it for the last 6 months, so I can get to that moment and be like, hey, these are the questions for you, because we've talked about them so much, which I do love as a moment to be able to share with the filmmakers. It's really, I feel very lucky to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I had such a great time with the entire process. The last component of the ecosystem before we double click into some of the actionable things people watching can use to apply or attend is the distribution component. Also incredible that, well, you take the films across the US, you also screen them online. With me, you were so collaborative. I told you about a deal I did with CBC. We worked together so that there was no conflict. That was really, it doesn't happen often, especially in Canada, where there can be tax credits tied to broadcaster dates. And so can you tell me about the kind of, what would you call it, the educational tour that you take the films on?
Yeah, totally. I think the way that, like, I guess to give the overview into that would be that, like, people often ask us what we are. And the best way to explain it is we are a grant, we're a festival, and do educational distribution. So those are the ways that I think about it. Grant first, that whole cycle of 10 filmmakers going through a process, connecting them with mental health feedback, connecting them with industry feedback, going along that journey with them, sharing it at the festival for the first time. And then we are then working with our great team of, there's 3 of us, and people are always surprised by that. There's not many people.
It's shine the spotlight. Who's the team?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's Carrie, our executive director and founder. And it is Rebecca, our managing director, and she handles all the kind of educational side, and they work on that together very closely. Once the films are kind of then that's not kind of the end in the journey for me. I will then meet with those guys, Carrie and Rebecca, to kind of think about how we can use those films as best in programming. And the way that the programming works is that schools, colleges, universities sign up on a subscription to be able to use our curriculum, our classes, to run events, run kind of educational sessions within their institutions. So what those typically look like is a couple of films, some really robust mental health resources, and a structure to be able to bring out that conversation. That's from kind of 10, 12 years of experience of delivering educational resources and curriculum to young people around mental health. So the films are really getting is this distribution through our educational partners that is kind of what I think, at least anyway, is that what most people want as an artist, to be able to make the thing and then have it to go out into the world to do the thing that was like the reason you wanted it to exist. You're like, I really want to talk about this because I want to talk about anxiety, for example. And then that goes into a class that is like understanding and coping with anxiety or whatever it might be. But yeah, so what we're doing is then kind of distributing through those partners these films on a regular basis. And I always think it's nice to think that like there's not really an endpoint for them. Like we work together to find the best combinations, and every new year that we get 10 new films, there's a whole load of new combinations. So we have around 160 films in the library, and that grows every year. So yeah, it's kind of, that's one of my favorite parts of it, seeing like what the films actually end up being part of beyond that moment, which is, yeah, really, it's a really cool thing to see that like the work goes out to do the work that it's intended to do.
Let's get into what people want to know about how they get that 7.5K USD.
Yeah.
I want to start with Brotherly because it was an unusual situation that I think speaks to how open you guys are to supporting and collaborating, in that I had already shot the film or was about to shoot the film with 60K of Canada Council for the Arts money, but I didn't have enough money to finish the film. And so I attended the Voices with Impact webinar where you were presenting the program, and you were also generous enough to give me a one-to-one follow-up call where I pitched you like this question, or I asked you, can I apply for this scenario? And you were like, never been done, but there's no reason why not, as long as we can get a 5-minute cut. And that was so great because it allowed me to finish my versions. There are now 5 versions of the film, including the 5th that'll be on YouTube. But the first one, which even had a different title, The Tides That Bind Us, premiered at Tasveer, was 11 minutes. Your version's the shortest at 5 minutes, 30 seconds, or just under that. And so step 1, going on the Voices with Impact website, reading the guidelines, and attending the webinar. Where do they go next?
Yeah. So yeah, first step is always come along to a webinar, because every year there is a different theme that we're trying to kind of get people to react to. We're pretty open about the theme. And the reason to be open about a theme is always that there are so many incredible stories out there that there's no possible way that 3 people can sit in a room and be like, what is the best theme going to be this year, and like actually get it right every time, you know? Like we we take a lot of inspiration and a lot of guidance from the educational partners that we work with, but essentially a theme is really helpful to give people some inspiration, to link ideas, but essentially we're very open to what people respond with. So that openness can also give a bit of vagueness in what someone's looking for, right? So this is why I do so many information events around the grant, because when I kind of run down everything that we're cool with, it's like, okay, so we take documentaries, we take narrative fiction, we take animation, take experimental movement pieces, poetry. Like the only thing we don't really fund is music videos. And that's simply because they don't work for the programming. So we're pretty open to everything, which means that the kind of what you can do is anything. So that's a little bit tricky. So the reason why we do those information sessions and is just to try and answer like all the questions that someone might have. Like granting and like applying for grants it can really feel like a mystery. Like you're like the smoke and mirrors of it. Like in those grant sessions, I will just tell everyone what we're looking for that year. So It's like, if there's particular themes that we're trying to explore within the theme, I might mention them, and I'll run everything down like that, because I am of the opinion that, like, it doesn't need to be a test, right? I just want to know if you, like, the filmmakers have a great idea that's going to work in the Voices with Impact world. And that's all we're really concerned about. So first step is, join one of those. And then from there, I will generally open the calendar, my calendar, for one-on-ones. The year that you applied was the first year we did one-on-ones like that, where kind of it's really difficult to understand, like, exactly what a granting body wants from you or a film fund wants from you. So it's, again, for that reason that people can jump on and ask questions like you did, in that sense of, like, this is my specific project. Like, how is this going to work? And then that gives us this great opportunity to be able to answer those questions and say, like, do you know what? Actually, we've never thought about that, but yeah, that could work. Because essentially, I think there's a huge pragmatism to just being like, we know what the end goal needs to be. And if we can work with filmmakers to get a great 5-minute film that's going to open up conversation, that's all we need to do. It's like, ultimately, we have this mission beyond, right? So it's easy to, like, work out with people whether we're going to be able to meet that. And that doesn't always necessarily line up in a really neat way. But I think flexibility is important with creativity, right? And with mental health. I think it's something that we have to acknowledge, that there's so many different ways people can approach storytelling, that we need to be open to telling stories in lots of different ways. And we need to be kind of cool with explaining to people what we're looking for in terms of the process of applying, because the way that you apply is with a proposal, which is essentially a pitch deck with a couple of extra parts in it in terms of, like, how are you telling the mental health stories. So I will say the order of applying is jump on a grant Q&A, try and get yourself a one-on-one. I try and make myself available for as many as possible, and then start putting together your pitch deck if you don't already have it. The ideal situation is to kind of have a bit of something together before that moment. Then you want to start building that out. We give a template for the proposal, which makes it super easy for our jurors, but also easy for applicants to be like, this is what they're actually looking for. So I think, I mean, there's definitely some tips I can give.
Yeah, let's hop into it.
Yeah. So what we're trying to communicate through those grant information sessions is that we want films that don't tie up really super neatly in the end, but there's kind of a load of different approaches you can take to that. The main things for us, we're looking for stories that we haven't really heard before, new takes on things that we might have heard a lot about, like in terms of anxiety and depression. We have a lot of films on those things, but new takes on them are always really kind of helpful and can really, like, reinvigorate conversation.
Which can be both conceptual or artistic execution.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. The main thing that I see that is, like, something where I just would want people to know about how we view it is how you lay out in your proposal, like, how you're going to deal with the mental health themes and how you're going to inform your storytelling by lived experience is really important, because we get a lot of really great ideas that are not grounded in lived experience or grounded in any kind of real consideration around the mental health aspects of the film. And would be a great film, but it's simply something we cannot fund. So that's something where I'm like, that's one of those things where we see it a lot of a great film, a great idea, but it's not possibly something that we could kind of share in that context to destigmatize mental health. And it totally can be something that, like, you don't have to have that lived experience yourself, but you have to care about it as the artist.
Right.
Like, you really do, because, we have lots of documentaries where people will be sharing someone else's story in collaboration with them, but that normally comes from a space of that filmmaker really wanting to tell a story around that experience for their subject for a reason that's personal to them. Like, and that can be anything, but you do have to, like, actually care about it, I think, is the thing for it. You have to, and if it's something that's not that connected to you, there has to be a fair amount of, like, we have to see from that proposal that you've gone that extra mile to, like, familiarize yourself with what you're talking about, be that depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or whatever it is.
Because it could be ignorant in a sense, but you need to be curious about
Totally.
being invested in exploring that.
Yeah.
And that would probably be in a written kind of director's statement, I guess, or artistic intentions, or there'd be a
Yeah.
page, I
So
guess, where you,
yeah, so we have those couple of pages which are around like tell us about the mental health themes and tell us how this is informed by lived experience. And that totally could be that I'm really interested in this. I have had my own kind of journey with something else that has made me kind of open to learning more about this, and I'm connected with this great subject who is someone I've known for whatever, and like I want to work with them collaboratively to tell their story. Like that's just a good enough reason, but it's like we want to know what that reason is. We want to know why you care about it. Like give us the passion bit is the thing I always say. Like we want to see that like you're proposing this idea not because you've found the fund and you're like, I'll think of something for that. You want
right.
to be like, what story do you want to tell? Like, and story do you need to tell? But because you can totally see that the grant exists and be like, I think I could come up with something for that, and it can be brilliant. But you just show us the passion for the story, and it tends to go a long, long way. Because I think one thing that we haven't spoken about, which is important for people to understand, is that we have a filmmaking jury and a mental health jury. So when proposals are coming in, they're being looked at by filmmakers to be, and you've done this yourself, to like kind of think about like, is this a feasible project? Is this going to be doable in 5 minutes? Is this going to be doable in the 5 month production time? Like all
On
those,
this budget.
yeah, all the budget stuff and everything like that. And then on the other side of that, you have these mental health professionals who are, working with people day in, day out around their supporting their mental health, looking at those proposals to be like, is this going to be helpful in a mental health conversation? Is this gonna responsibly portray this experience? Is this gonna cause more harm than good? Is this we have a real focus on like, are these ideas unnecessarily triggering? And that's like a weird wording, right? But it's like so many different things can be triggering, but it's like, can you show us this in the safest way possible or whatever that might be? That's a lot of considerations to have as applying, right? But I think that, that approach, if you really want to tell a mental health story with that kind of you're passionate about and you care about, it does come fairly naturally to propose a idea in the way that works for our format. We tried to like keep it as close to like a usual pitch deck as possible, that you can write it, and then that's helpful for you going forward, because there's nothing worse than being, like putting all your time and effort into a pitch and then being like, oh, I can never use that again. I know what that's like as a artist. So it's like, this should be a helpful exercise for people. But yeah, just that kind of keeping mindful that we want to make sure that we know that you have a passion for telling this story, that you care about it. And that's going to be able to connect with both the filmmaking jury and the mental health jury. That's quite a key part of it, I think.
I remember being quite stunned by the lineup of very strong, bold, courageous storytelling, and with the strong points of view of the artists. Sometimes when we talk about triggering and trigger warnings, it can be interpreted as these have to be bland stories. And that definitely wasn't the case. I remember watching the program in San Francisco for the first time and being like, wow, Chris really allowed artists to express themselves. And it was really bold. Now you had people at the festival, I forget what they're called, like for support. If someone wanted to step out and talk to someone, active listeners.
Yeah, which is an important part of it in terms of like, when we're showing these films and we're working with educators to show them, we are always thinking about like what supports need to be there for people watching the films. And I always think about it as like, it's my job to work with the filmmakers to make sure that we are creating films that, keep us in it responsibly tell the story, don't use anything kind of for the sensational aspect of it, like tell it in a way that's really impactful and emotionally impactful and resonant. But there's certain ways you can tell us things that are difficult without kind of like making us really go through it.
Yeah.
So I think part of that is like on me and the mentors and the mental health professionals giving feedback to the filmmakers as we go through. But then, yeah, at the festival, it's really important for us to make sure that there is people there, that if, someone has a lot going on and they have a big reaction to a film, that there is someone there they can go speak to and like kind of process that with. So we always have active listeners present at the festival. And what I do say, which is like an interesting thing for like if you're working in this kind of space, and I think this can also be like a good thing to think about, like, do you have this on set with you? But when you have active listeners in spaces, very often they aren't used. When you don't have them, that's always when people need them. So,
Right.
because I think the idea that you can communicate there is this safety net allows people to feel more free and safe to feel what they need to feel. So our active listeners are amazing. And every year I say, sorry that you didn't have to do very much, which I think is a success, all right. But yeah.
Yeah. Let's get into some technical nitty gritty. What deliverables do you require for the submission?
Great question. So, in terms of when people are applying, yeah. So, what we want when people are applying for the proposal is that pitch deck. We're asking for a story outline. We are asking for you to share with us who your team is. You don't have to know who they are entirely, but it's good to have a good idea. I will say try and get the main players on board so we have a sense of it. We
We call that cast here in North America.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just to get really so it's like let's say half a page to one page.
Yep.
For the story outline.
Yep.
Script if you got it, if it's fiction.
Yeah.
One page for team bios, let's say one for cast and then one for crew.
Yeah. Yeah. And a thing to say that we don't require a script. We ask that you submit it if you have it, usually as a link within the pitch deck is the best way. The reason is that the jurors are not required to read the scripts. Pretty much all of them do, but it's not a requirement because what we need to see is like what's going to happen on screen through that story outline. So that is also another thing that is a tip that I will share, that make sure your story outline is like really clear about what's going to happen on screen, what that journey is going to be.
Which includes the ending. So many filmmakers don't want to like spoil the ending, but it's like, I've been a juror. I need to know the ending. I'm not the audience. I'm the juror. So it's in the ending that you're communicating your point of view and how this character arc or event will resolve within the context of the product, for lack of a better word. And I think that's a big mistake. A lot of filmmakers are like, I don't want to spoil the ending. It's not a trailer. We're doing business here. I need to know how this ends.
Yeah. If you don't want to spoil the ending, you just spoil chances of getting the money. That's the real situation. Yeah. I mean, just very clearly, like one of the questions for the jurors is, does this show accurately, clearly what this film is going to be? Does this proposal tell us what is going to happen and what the story flow is going to be? Because you're right. Like, how can you tell whether it'll be good if, you set everything up and then you're like, and then we'll explore that. Like, no, tell us what you're going to explore and how, because otherwise we can't responsibly say yes to something, because it might be that you want an ending that would be really difficult for us to ever sign off on. And also that's going to be a tricky thing because that's just, I want you to make the film that you want to make, whether it's with us or not, right? Like that's what all filmmakers should get to do. But if we don't know what the ending is, it's really hard for us to be like, yeah, this is going to be a great project for us.
Now, having said that, so that people don't feel like this is a barrier, I would imagine if you are communicating that there will be a sort of pre-production or scripting phase, you could communicate, look, this is the impossible choice the character faces, or this is the question I'm going to explore in a documentary. I don't know how it's going to end because I'm going to figure that out in the pre-production process. But I currently hypothesize it will go in one direction or another. And so I think that's another thing, like, if you don't have an ending yet, there's a way to communicate that we can de-risk or risk mitigate the investment by communicating that you have the self-awareness to understand that there's a gap here that could be a challenge for a juror to sign off on or an investor to invest in. And even just saying like, I get that, this is a problem, but I'm going to figure it out, goes a long way.
It absolutely does. Like that's a really great point because that is how we look at it. Like the reason why it's helpful for jurors and like us to know what you're intending the ending to be is because that is that's the biggest view we get into your artistic voice in that moment, right? Like, because we ask for work samples too, and we can talk a bit more about those after because people also have lots of questions about those, but we get to see your work. But if if for lots of independent filmmakers, the last work you did is not always, it's not always an example of what you're trying to do now. Not always, because it requires a lot of material things to line up for you to be able to create work. And that might have been a few years ago, and you might have really honed a different way of telling stories in that time.
It'd
So
be a
we want
different genre.
exactly. And that often is the case of people moving from maybe documentary into fiction or whatever it might be. The main thing that the main way we get a look into what you want to say and what your artistic voice is through that story outline. So we would totally be open and very interested in the idea that someone's saying like, hey, I'm going to work this out. But we would want still that like option 1 or option 2 kind of situation, because we just want to know like, how are you going to say this? Because like that's essentially, any fund in this way is like, because it's not like you get the grant and then we're like, see you in a few months with the film. Like we are quite hands-on in the process.
Which was great.
Yeah.
I had a great time with you as a story editor as well, guiding, continuing to help me, scaffold, structure, polish, refine. Yeah, I mean, like, because hands-on can sometimes sound invasive, but
Yeah.
my experience with you was that you were very much a partner in the creative process, and because you understood what I was trying to do, and you were trying to help me do it. It wasn't what I think people can sometimes worry about, which is you trying to make it something that I'm not intending.
That's part of it, right? Because I very strongly believe that there are multiple ways that any storyteller can tell their story. And there are versions of that work really well for the work that we do. And there are versions that would work really well for a different kind of work, right? So the way that I see it is very much like, I would never want to work with a filmmaker and get them to a place where they made a film they didn't want to make that worked really well for our programming. Because then I've just severed the connection with that filmmaker, right? Like that's not good for the longevity of a relationship, and that's not good for the whole kind of like ecosystem of VWI filmmakers, which is a really important thing to us in the sense that you've made great connections with other VWI alumni, and it's really great and a really special thing to be connected to these people that are like, I want to tell a story that it's real reason that I'm wanting to tell it is to like get people to talk about something that's hard to talk about. Like it's a thing, right? And it really connects people to want to tell those stories in a way that, really honors their emotions around it. And you have to kind of approach it like that, I think. And that like, there are so many ways that you can tell any one story that, my role is very much to learn how each filmmaker wants to tell that story and then make sure they get the best version of that for them. That would 100% of the time also be the best version for us. But yeah, you are right. Some people are like hands-on in a scary, annoying way, though that's not really what we're looking for. All our mentors as well that give feedback, and we're connecting with people. I'm very clear with them of like, you can totally disagree with like the other feedback that the filmmaker's getting. Like, just say what you want to say, like help them get to where they want to get. Because that's the most important thing, right? Like, there's not very many times you get to tell stories in this way without a real kind of push from someone. Like, I mean, for myself, that's a situation of like many times that I've written stuff, it's to brief, it's because it needs to hit something and do something. Whereas, yeah, I feel I'm very lucky to work in a nice space where we can be like, no, you can actually just do it how you want to this time, but here's some stuff that we'll help out.
We'll get back to the final deliverables in a second. I also just wanted to highlight that you hooked me up with a mentor, Stephanie something, who was one of the writers on this incredible Sundance film. Was it Sometimes I Think About Dying?
Yes.
Is that the name?
Yeah, that's it.
And she was amazing. And on one of the cuts,
yeah,
she give great feedback. And sometimes it was just straight up like, this shot is redundant. I understood what you were trying to say from that shot 3 shots ago. And so, yeah, you also have a really great network and access to really high caliber mentors that are very generous with their time. So I remember that it wasn't just you also introduced me to some great people. But back to the deliverables, lookbooks can be helpful. Some like color palettes, production design elements, references.
Yeah. So if I run it down, it like, just to give the wider view, it's we want to know who you are, who you're working with. We want to know what the story is exactly from beginning to end. We want to know what work you've done before. If you have worked in documentary, and you're pitching us a narrative, or if you've not worked in animation and you're pitching us an animation, we want to see a work sample from your team that is like, who's the animator you're working with? Who is the, like, let's see a bit of like, does this make sense for the next step for you? Because
Yeah, again, it's like self-awareness of skill gaps and
yes, yeah,
communicating how you're going to find complementary support.
yeah. If you have 3 work samples of your own as a director, but you find a new great DOP that you want to work with who makes everything look the way you want it to look, then don't give us your 3. Give 2 from you and 1 from, and just give us your DOP's reel or whatever, right? So like, just think about it in terms of how what we're looking at is the idea good? Are you going to be able to do the idea? Those are the 2 big questions, right?
And not just you, but the
No.
collective plural you.
Yeah. 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 Like, do you have the tools? And mostly the tools of people. So
I say that because it can feel overwhelming to sometimes feel like you have to be the one answer to everything. And it's like, no, there's a lot of power in saying, I'm not doing this alone. Look how strong this team is.
Absolutely. And one thing I would say for that, animation is a good example of this, but like, if you are an animator and you're like, I'm doing everything, I'm looking at it and I'm like, ooh, really? Do you want to? Like, is this a good idea? Because
Like sound design, for example.
like if you're doing every part of it, like, depends one on how quick you're animating, depends like how, like what your animation looks like, all those different things, right? Like, there's so many things in that. Like, if you are incredibly fast, let us know. Like, it's fine to just say.
Right. And that's where a work sample to prove that
Yeah.
would be helpful.
Yeah, like, I made this in X amount of time or whatever, like those kind of things. You can let us know that. I don't want to look at it and be like, and the jury don't want to look at it and be like, okay, well, this is one person working for 5 months solid on this. Are they going to be able to pull this off? Like, that sounds like it's going to be a stressful, lonely time for that person. And we're not in the business of making people have terrible times. Hopefully not. So, so we're looking at that too. Like, is this going to be a thing that is, difficult for you to pull off and too hard? Because like, we don't like, there is that too. In like, some people do like to go through like all the process of doing everything themselves, which is great. But like, let us know that works for you, because sometimes it doesn't work for people. But yeah, so we want to know who you're doing it with, what the idea is. We want to have an idea of the visual world of that lookbooks, kind of like visual inspiration stuff. We want to know what the mental health themes are, how you're going to explore them. We want to know what those filmmaking techniques are and how you're going to use them to tell the story and to share the emotion of the film. That's like an important part of what you're going to kind of try and get across. And then, yeah, like how it's informed by lived experience is another really important part of that. We also want to know your production schedule. There's not many things in this that are a test, but the production schedule is a test to see if you read when the deliverables are due in the project. We want to see a budget. There's a million questions that we can answer about budget, but we are looking at it to see whether, and the jury are looking at it, whether it looks kind of a sensible thing. So as you said, with like, where are the holes? Like, be self-aware of where the gaps are. Explain everything in the budget. Because if you have access to an incredible location that we look at, like, and you look at as a juror and you're like, how are they going to afford this castle? If they work in a hotel that looks like a castle and they've got a great, amazing. But we don't know that from just reading the budget. So you need to let us know. I always say the notes column in the budget is the most important column for us. Because it's like, the number, great, but like, tell us why, what, how. If something seems really high or really low, it can be tricky to work out whether that's going to work. So if you feel like anything is like a good deal or a bad deal, like, because we have that too, in terms of like, we have filmmakers from all over the world, right? Some things are expensive in some countries that aren't expensive everywhere. If it feels like it's a really expensive thing, then just kind of give us some context to that. And yeah, I'm sure you'll be able to kind of share a little bit about how it feels like just jumping into a project and looking at a budget too, because it's kind of weird, right?
Yeah. So on the jury side, I can say, like, try to make it digestible in 10 minutes. So if you imagine that a juror can give you 10 minutes, because understand, I'm volunteering my time, I'm reading 10 projects. So that is 100 minutes of my time that I'm trying to find time for. And like you said, I'll do my best to get through everything. But if you have a 6-page script, assume that that's going to take me 7 minutes. So I'm going to read the pitch deck first. And there's a game of seduction there where you want to kind of hook the juror to keep reading more. So the projects that were strong from the first document kept me hooked through to like, oh, I really want my vote to go to this project.
Yeah.
So I'd love for them to continue giving me as much ammunition as possible so I can go to bat and make this one of my selections. So on that front too, like if the script isn't where it needs to be, don't include the script.
Yeah.
And communicate that like you have a early draft, make the story outline strong, and then communicate that you're going to be polishing the script in pre-production. But yeah, I think the best tip I've gotten was assume that your juror has 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Same goes for the visual reference materials. You know, if you can show me a 2 to 3 minute short or a demo reel for a cinematographer, think about how all of those assets, they're called in marketing, can complement each other to be efficient for the juror's use of time. Quickly on the notes budget, you're right. The notes section is so important. If you have, I'm shooting on film and the cost of film stock is zero, tell me it's because you have a bunch of film stock in your freezer. Or like you said, if location fees are zero, communicate it's because you have access to a location. That's easy. I can say check. On the production schedule, easiest way to start that seemingly overwhelming process, look at when Voices with Impact has told you they're going to announce the winners, and then when the festival is for delivery, and already you have the beginning and end of that Tetris block. And the reality is if it's 3 months, block it down by month, pre-production, production, post-production, and you just kind of eat that elephant one bite at a time. Same with the budget. You have 7.5K USD. So, you know, it's not like a $2 million budget where you're getting into how much does an AC cost for 17 days versus 18 based on union rates. Chances are you're working with collaborators who are giving you a bunch of support in kind. So just kind of start with what has the organization told me are the requirements, and then kind of chunk it down into tasks and subtasks.
And like everything that you plan is a guide to make sure you can do the thing. We are aware that everything will change, like 100% everything will change.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. And if it doesn't, brilliant, well done.
Right.
But it will.
Now, do you have any other tips, tricks, or advice before I ask you a little bit about distribution?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually going to turn a lamp on because I feel like it's getting...
I was seeing the light changing on your face, and I was reminded that you're being very generous because you're 6 hours ahead, and it's late in the day for you. So thanks again for being here.
Of course. That's the one thing that I love working with people all over the world, but it does mean I have to be like pretty loosey-goosey about how my days. But
destigmatize naps.
Absolutely. So tips and tricks. Yeah, I think that like the main thing that like really is the thing that people fall down on the most is the story outline. The synopsis story outline is kind of like as a together thing, because the way that people kind of view them as different things, and kind of like some people really like thinking about like them in certain ways. So what we ask you for is a log line, and then essentially what is a story outline. The log line, often we will see that people have like a cool snappy log line that doesn't really connect to the story outline because of like people get into form over like what it is, right? So the log line, you can be all dramatic and not tell us the end on that, of course, right? Like that's the kind of, we want the hook. Make sure that is good, because that does really, as you said, the first part, it's the first thing that people see. So like that can really hook people in. And it also shapes the way that everyone reads the story outline. So you can give us that kind of, this is kind of exciting, and then we can just read everything that happens, right? That's great. But it does color like how we see the next part. Like it really does inform on that. But yeah, story outline, the reason that this is really important, and this is what I see people fall down on a lot, is where people are vague on the basis of like, I'll work that out later. What it means is not so much that the filmmaking jury can say, great, this is a good story, this will work in 5 minutes. It's more that the mental health professionals can't really say whether the story is being told responsibly, or whether it's being told in a way that's going to be destigmatizing, or this is going to be a helpful thing for a mental health conversation. That's more where people get like stuck, where it's like the vagueness makes it difficult for people who are not coming with a film eye to understand what you're trying to tell them. So my tip is essentially remember that people will read this who don't read story outlines, scripts every day of their lives. Like those people are in the jury, and they are, you know, we have great jurors that come back year after year, and they definitely are really, really great and really understand the process for us. But you don't want to be in a position where someone just misunderstands what you're trying to do with your story. And that's really important, just for the clarity on that. It's something that's huge. Another thing that I see a lot that people will kind of, I guess, fall down on is when they're like, where their work samples and their strengths don't really make sense with the project at this point, because often that will look at like, I'm sure at one point that you could do this amazing idea, but right now doesn't seem like the time or whatever, right? So an example I'll give for that is if you have never written anything with lots of dialogue in, and you're pitching as something that is so driven by dialogue that like it's the only thing that's happening in there. Because 5 minutes is short, right? So you could just do a conversation, like that's totally legitimate as an idea. But if you can't holding a 5-minute conversation is really quite difficult as a writer. So like things like that where they don't add up, like in that sense, or like the other thing with that is like when things don't add up with the work samples, but also when they don't add up with the budget. So if you have a great story, great outline, and as part of that, there is a huge component of hair and makeup. It's a huge big thing. Maybe we have a monster kind of character or something, or we have something where it's like they look a really specific kind of sort of way, and then I look at your budget and there's no line for that. Or if costume is a huge thing and there's no line for costume, these are the kind of things that people just, they're not a given, because we don't know what you're like, you know, like we don't know what you're going to do, and we don't know how you're going to approach that. It's a tricky thing. And also if you're like, this is specifically like what we're doing, this is going to tell the story, it needs to be found in the budget, because it's like, you know, when you say you have 10 minutes, right? 15 minutes looking over something, those are the things you look for. You're like, where are the gaps in this? Because we want the project to work, but we have to check that it would. So those are the things. It's just like knowing where your blind spots are, basically. So my advice would be, if you can book that one-on-one with me, like I will look through the proposals at that point and point out where the blind spots are and where there's space, you know, but then also like share it with someone else that has no idea what the project is.
An accountant or something.
Yeah.
Who's never read a screenplay, doesn't know the format. Yeah, like it should make sense to them.
Yeah, it should. And that's like probably, if I'm underlining it all as one tip, like that's it. Because otherwise the idea is probably too complicated for 5 minutes anyway.
Yeah, the other thing I like to think about, because I'm in Quebec, is whether I'm reading in French or someone for whom French is their native language is reading my thing, I try to write for someone who's reading my work in a second language. And I think the reality is, I hope it's not coming across as speaking down to anyone, because even for someone who's speaking their first language, it increases readability using simple language.
Great.
The other tool I use is called Hemingway Editor, and it'll grade your text to tell you what grade level it's at. And I'm known to be verbose, so I can write that and it'll say like, this is at a grade 12 level, simplify, to bring it down to increase readability. The other thing, it sucks, but sometimes I'll write like a page to realize that really I only need the last paragraph, and it's painful to like delete all that other. What's that?
It's a classic writer thing. I think that it's just like you always have to write yourself into it. When I read my own stuff back, I'm like, that's me thinking about starting writing.
Yes. Yeah. Any other tips, tricks, and advice before we get to distribution?
I think just keep things as short as you can. I think that helps. I think people are refreshed by seeing the kind of conciseness of an application and a proposal. So that, and then the one thing that I tell everyone every year, and then we still get a load where that doesn't happen, is that there's a template, but please completely change the way the template looks, because otherwise the juror is going to look at the same proposal 12 times and it turns people's brains off right away. Like it's just like, if you know, like we've done the template, so you know everything that you need to put in there, and it gives you a starting point, because a blank page is quite scary. I know it's there for you to work with, but do work with it. Do make it look in any way that you want it to look. But yeah, clear so we can read it, but different from the template because all the jurors know what the template looks like.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the storytelling and design of a pitch,
Yeah.
where the
Bring us
font, the
into the visual
colors,
world. Yeah.
it is a representation of how the film is going to look and feel. And so you need to take that opportunity to communicate. If the deck looks and feels like a rom-com and you're pitching a horror, then already it suggests to me that there's something, I'm bumping on something.
Yeah.
So yeah, use those opportunities. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention was filmmaking is iterative design in every way. And that includes like, give yourself time to revise your application over the course of weeks and send to friends and family or accountants for feedback, and give yourself time to revise. If you don't get this, you can apply next year, or you can apply to other film funds or grants. So if you don't get this for whatever reason, it might not be merit, it might be competitiveness, or maybe there was another film that touched on similar themes and maybe, something was moved forward with that one instead of yours. And so there's iterative design here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can always ask Voices with Impact for feedback on your pitch.
We do give some feedback to the shortlist now.
Okay.
We get so many applications now that it is tricky for us to give individual feedback to everybody. I always say it's worth asking because sometimes it might be a really obvious thing that we have a moment to look over. So we can always do it, but it's worth asking because even just for the fact that if you ask, I'll see your name again. So
yeah, it's another marketing
more likely
touch point.
that I'll remember it. That makes a difference. Many people who have received the grant, it has been their third or fourth time applying for the grant. The majority of people that get it every year have applied before.
Interesting.
So there is that. Also, the correlation between people who come to more than one grant event and get the funding is high. I think last year, 7 out of the 10 applicants had been to more than 2 grant application events. It's because we're telling you what we're looking for, right? So it makes sense. It's like really logical, but also it's important to say that it actually does come to fruition. Come to the things, but also just apply because we get so many applications that say we got over 300 last year. We have to select 10. That's really difficult. Like there's always more than 10 that are incredible. Every year we have a lot of people that are applying, but the more that you kind of give yourself that opportunity, put your hat in the ring, then, the more likely that is to happen for you. And following and watching the films and understanding more about the grant helps you understand what we're looking for as well.
Well, the last thing, as it relates to the festival and distribution, you allowed me to delay the online distribution until the exclusive license window ran out with CBC, and then you guys took the film out. Yeah, my experience has been you guys really were unusual in your openness to work towards the film being as successful as it could be, and that the filmmakers are as successful as they can be, all on terms that are open to be discussed.
Yes, absolutely. The premiere is kind of the only thing we really ask for in that. We kind of look at it as we premiere in June, the cohort of 10 films. And then what we're going to do is support you in every single way possible that we can to get the film out as far and as wide as it can go. People ask us often like how the distribution works, and the easiest way to explain it is that we get educational rights to show the film within our programming in perpetuity. Other than that, the film is yours. It's your IP. You keep that, you retain that, and you can monetize the film, get it to where you need it to be. We'll always ask when we're doing any kind of public programming whatsoever to check that it doesn't kind of interrupt anything else that you are doing with the film at that moment. Because it's important, right? Like for us, the way we see it is that tracking distribution beyond our educational distribution is important to us because it shows that we're getting this mental health conversation out to places where we couldn't always do. The way I think about it is that it's hard to get some people to come to a mental health event. If we can get that film in in any film festival, any kind of screening situation on a broadcast network, if we can get that, on a national broadcast somewhere, if we can get it on a plane, whatever it might be, wherever those windows are, then that's great for us that someone saw that film. You know, we love that part of it. And it's a bit more developed than it was when you went through the process. But we do now look at the distribution outside of our distribution with each of the filmmaking teams and try and kind of offer some support around what we've learned about where the films do well, where they can go. What festivals always tend to program a 5-minute short in a block of shorts, all those kind of things. So yeah, we wanna see the film be a success at far and beyond what our purposes are. That's the important part of it. We want to get that conversation out. Like truly, it doesn't always have to be like, you know, us coming in with a big sign saying, "Hey, it's us." It's, you know, we want those stories to go as far as they can in every way that they can.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And I
for having me.
appreciate the support of Voices with Impact on my journey personally and for the film. It's been a great partnership, and I look forward to continuing.
Thank you so much for having me, Gavin. A pleasure to chat to you as always. It was great.
Same.